David. Hey,
Hello.
so I heard you're an expert with data and you work with EMR.
Well, at least one of those things is true.
Oh, wow. Wow.
But yeah.
Wow.
Great to be here today. I don't know. I've been in the data space for a while. I think I first started recording data when I was in high school, and I worked at a fiber optic company, and I was testing fiber optic devices and getting readings from them, and just recording hundreds of readings and typing them into Excel spreadsheets. So that has been my life for the past 20 years now. It's been great.
Wow. Super interesting. Super interesting. So now I understand you're a developer advocate or on the EMR team, and you're going to talk to us about a new feature in EMR, right?
That's right. Yeah. So yeah, a little bit of background, more relevant background about me, possibly.
Yeah.
Been in the
Please.
analytics space for about a decade. Started a social analytics company here in Seattle.
Mm.
Processed all sorts of Twitter data, all that kind of fun stuff, and have used HBase, MongoDB, Spark, all sorts of fun stuff, and joined the EMR team a few years ago. First as a big data architect to help our customers figure out how to design, build, debug their EMR apps all across the board, everything from Spark to HBase to Presto, and then switched into this developer advocate role recently to help folks understand how best to make use of EMR. And EMR has changed a lot in the past 3 years. It used to be just EMR and EC2. Then we came out with a new
Mm.
deployment option that was EMR on EKS. So if you're running Kubernetes, you can now deploy EMR apps in your Kubernetes cluster. And then if you don't want to worry about infrastructure at all, we now have EMR Serverless, and you can just like
Mm.
run a job essentially at the click of a button. So yeah, pretty awesome.
Oh, super interesting. Super interesting. So you mentioned EMR serverless. What exactly is EMR serverless?
Yeah. We announced this at reInvent last year. So EMR Serverless is a new deployment option for EMR, where you can run Spark and Hive jobs without having to worry about provisioning infrastructure. So, if you are familiar with EMR, you're probably familiar with figuring out how to spin up EC2 instances, how to choose from the multitude of instances available, figuring out what network settings to use, and all that kind of fun stuff. Well, it turns out a lot of people just want to run Spark jobs or want to run Hive jobs. So with EMR Serverless, it's a new deployment option where you don't have to worry about deploying infrastructure. You don't have to worry about managing infrastructure. You can just run your jobs and get on with your daily life. So pretty awesome. And yeah, like I said, we announced it at reInvent last year, and we just made it generally available 2 days ago on Wednesday of this week. So this is definitely nice and fresh.
Yeah. I heard about that announcement too. And you said it supports two different things, right? Spark and Hive, right?
That's correct. Yep. So yeah, with EMR on EC2, there's about a dozen different frameworks you can deploy. Anything from Spark and Hive to Presto or Trino and HBase and Flink. So you have all these different options where you
Mhm.
can go in and deploy these things and dive into the EC2 instances as you like. But yes, with EMR Serverless, we're just starting with Spark and Hive, as those are some of the more popular frameworks that folks want to run on EMR.
Ah, super cool. Super cool.
Quite indeed quite interesting. So, who would want to use EMR serverless and why?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of our customers are data engineers or data scientists, right? If you work in the data engineering space, you are often running ETL jobs and pulling data in from one place and transforming it and putting it out to somewhere else, or ELT or reverse ETL, all these different options. But data scientists, data engineers are the primary folks that would tend to use EMR serverless, and anybody that's running, Spark jobs, right? So if you have an Apache Spark job that you need to read data in from somewhere and transform it on a large scale, you can do that with EMR serverless. So those are definitely the folks that would typically use EMR.
Ah, that's very
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. So you have EMR serverless, right? And we also have a service called EMR. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between those two?
Yeah, for sure. It's really a big spectrum. So I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but with EMR and EC2, you have essentially full control over the entire framework and infrastructure. So when you spin up EMR and EC2, you choose your instances all the way down to, do you want five, I don't know, R5 4XLs or 800 M5D, 24XL or whatever you want, right? So that's the nice thing about EMR and EC2 is you have all of this optionality and flexibility. You can run it on, spot instances as well, and there's a lot you can do to kind of dive in and configure those. And you can, SSH in to any of those instances, configure them, install your own software. But that can be a little bit overwhelming for some folks that don't live, on a keyboard, right? So with EMR serverless, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. You just have your Spark code and you say, run this job. And if you want, you can tell it to give you a certain amount of resources, but you don't even have to do that. The service actually scales automatically for you as the job is running. So with more recent versions of Spark, and this is getting in the weeds a little bit, but there's something called dynamic resource allocation. And so you start your job and Spark kind of keeps an eye on things. And if it needs to add more resources, it goes ahead and requests more resources. And with serverless, we just, throw more resources as Spark asks for it. So it's a lot simpler than EMR on EC2 because all you have to worry about really is your application code. And there is some speed up time as well. If you've run EMR and EC2, we have to go and procure EC2 instances and spin them up and install all the software. We don't have to do that with EMR serverless. So the execution time or the spin up time is a lot faster to the degree that if you have an EMR serverless application running, the job can start within seconds. So you hit go, and even before you can refresh the console, the job starts running. So it's pretty awesome.
Well, this is interesting, and this is quite time saving if it works. It's gonna work on its own. How can one start a job?
So there's a
And
few different. Oh, go ahead.
and how long does it take to run
Yeah,
for once in a job? Yeah.
Those
yeah.
are good questions.
Yeah, there's a few different ways. So you can interface with EMR Serverless from the command line. So using the AWS CLI, or different SDKs like Bodo 3 or the Java SDK. So if you are building your own apps, you can submit jobs that way programmatically. Or we also have integration with EMR Studio. So you can go into EMR Studio and you can actually create applications and create jobs directly from the console. And so if you don't want to deal with, terminal at all, you can go ahead and do it that way. And then, of course, one of the other things we did. Oh, hey, Abhishek. One of the other things we did was we have an Airflow operator ready to go as well with EMR Serverless. So if you use Apache Airflow to orchestrate your workflows, you can actually interface with EMR Serverless from Apache Airflow today. So that's something that we wanted to have out there and ready because a lot of folks use Airflow to orchestrate their EMR jobs. Whew, man.
That's super interesting. I mean, this whole concept of using MR and serverless, and then you mentioned Airflow. For our audience and for myself, can you talk a little bit about what Airflow is?
Yeah, Airflow is one of the most popular, workflow orchestration tools out there. So, back in the early days of computing, we used to use something called cron to schedule jobs. Well, it turns out things get complicated, and you need to chain jobs together and stuff like that. So, Airflow was a piece of software. I think it probably came out around 2015, maybe a little bit earlier. And I want to say it came out of Airbnb.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, Airbnb donated it to the Apache Foundation, and it's now one of the most popular orchestration tools. So you create flows of jobs inside of Airflow, and it takes care of running those and retrying them if things fail or scheduling them. So it's definitely one of the more popular ways I've seen that folks use to schedule their jobs. And with all of my work with EMR, I'd probably say 90% of the customers that I worked with were using Airflow.
Oh wow, that sounds super cool. I might have to get on that. You said it replaces cron. Wow. This is dating myself. That's the only thing I know how to use, right? You just it's cron. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, super exciting. So, I've heard that you have a demo for us today.
I do.
Is that true?
That is
All
very
right.
true. I am.
Oh,
I like to live on the edge of my seat, so we're going to do a live demo.
all right. Some
Wow.
live coding. So let's see if we can kick that off then.
All right, sweet. So I'm going to start off with a terminal because that's where I am most comfortable. And what
All
I'm
right.
going to do in this demo, I'm going to show how to get started with EMR Serverless in the console. And I'm only going to run 2 commands. So that's how easy this is. So let me go ahead and clear my screen. I'm going to run 2 commands as long as everything goes well. It is a live demo after all. The first thing we need to do is create an application on EMR Serverless. Applications are the different frameworks that you can run. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Spark application on EMR Serverless for EMR release 6.6.0. The EMR releases map to different Spark versions. So this is Spark version 3.2. So I've already gone ahead now and created that application. I'm going to save that application ID. And if I do an EMR Serverless, you know what? I said I was going to do 2 commands, so I'm going to do 2 commands. The next thing I'm going to do is run a job. So I'll go ahead and do my start job run. There's a couple things I need here. I need my application ID, which I just created, and then my job role ARN. So this is an IAM role that I can use to execute the job, and it just needs access to S3 for this particular thing. I'm actually going to use some data from the registry of open data on AWS. The NOAA data sets are some of my favorites. So I'm going to hit start job run, and there we go. I can go back and do whatever I am doing for work now. But that's all it took to go ahead and take my code and run it. Let me actually show what's happening behind the scenes here. So if I do an EMR serverless get application, that shows me the application, and the application is already started. So there's my Spark 6.6 or Spark 3.2 application that started. And if I do EMR serverless get job run, that job run right now is going to be pending because I just created this application. So the application, when you first create it, is going to take a couple minutes to spin up, right? But that's one of the other things we did with EMR Serverless is we added something called pre-initialized capacity. So if you want your jobs to run within seconds, you can have this pre-initialized capacity in EMR Serverless, and when you submit a job, it runs within seconds. So this job here, it's going to sit in pending until the application gets up and running and is ready to schedule. But while that is going, I'm actually going to switch over to the console and show you how to create an EMR job without using the CLI. So give me 1 second just to stop and reshare here.
Oh, that's interesting. While you're doing that, we got a question from one of our attendees. So, can you run EMR notebooks on the new EMR serverless?
Of course. How did I know that was going to come up? I will say not yet, but we definitely want you to be able to. So that is one of the goals of the EMR Serverless. At GA, you can't run notebooks on it, but that's definitely, we want to have that interactive experience. That's one of the first things that we are going to be working on now that the service is GA. So thank you for asking that. I also want to run notebooks on EMR Serverless so you can have that interactive response time and automatic scaling. So definitely something we want to do. Thank you for asking that. All right, cool. I think we're ready to go to the console now.
All right.
And then is that popped up yet? Because I had to stop and reshare.
Okay. I think it's popping up now.
Sweet. All right.
Awesome.
So this is our lovely EMR console. Folks that use EMR will be used to all these lovely EMR and EC2 settings over here, but we are going to click on this EMR serverless setting here. With EMR Serverless, it has integration with EMR Studio. If you haven't used EMR Studio, it's good that that person just asked a question about notebooks. EMR Studio is a way to run managed notebooks with EMR and EC2 and EMR and EKS. And with Serverless, you can use the EMR Studio to manage your serverless applications. So I'm going to go ahead, click Manage Applications. If you don't have EMR Studio, you can click this nice little orange button here, and we will create and launch an EMR Studio for you to go ahead and manage your applications. This signs you in with IAM. So you're just, boom, signed right into the application here. And you can see, let me zoom in a little bit so you can actually see. You can also see these are applications I've created from the command line. So the serverless demo is the one that I think I just created about 3 minutes ago. Yep. And we can see that that one is started. So I can click in here and I can look at my job, and my job is actually now running. The other thing we did with serverless is we have Spark UIs that you can launch from the serverless console. So this will launch a Spark UI for your job that you can go in and debug your job, or kind of do whatever you want. Since you can run Hive jobs, we also have the Tez UI that you can launch from here as well. So if you want to do everything in the console, you can definitely do that. Let me show you again real quick. All you need to do to run a job or create an application and run a job in the console. So I'm going to go ahead, copy my S3 script right there. So I've already got a few applications, but let me go ahead and create an application here. I'll do this, my new app. I select Spark, my version of EMR. We're starting with 6.6.0. As we release new versions of EMR, they'll of course show up here in EMR Serverless. And then the big thing here, I can just click create application right now, and I get all this configuration right here. I can of course customize these as well. So the pre-initialized capacity is what I mentioned. If you want to have a certain amount of capacity ready and waiting to run your EMR jobs, you can change this here. We can have 1, 10, 100 Spark drivers running there. You can customize the size of your driver or the size of your executor. So if you have a good idea of what your workload needs, you can do that there. The other thing that's really important, this auto stop and auto start. So by default with EMR Serverless, if you don't submit a job for 15 minutes, we'll spin down that application and you won't be charged anything. If you submit another job, we'll automatically spin the application back up, but it will take a minute or two to kind of spin up that capacity. You could actually just turn that off. So you could have capacity sitting there ready and waiting for you whenever you want to submit a job, and that job would start within seconds. Or you can change this to 6 hours. Maybe you want to have this capacity ready and waiting for you throughout the day, and then shut down when you go home at night. But I'm going to go ahead and just use the default settings here. So I'll create an application. There we go. That app is creating. And let's see, I can go in here and submit a job. So I'll do this. I have this extreme weather job that I use. I need a job role to be able to run this. And then I just paste in my PySpark script right there. And I hit submit job. And ideally, needed to update one thing. There we go. Now that job can go and run. So there we go. Not only can I do it with 2 commands on the command line interface, but I can do it with 2 clicks on the console as well. And that Spark UI that I popped up earlier, that is actually right here. So this is just an example of the Spark UI, and I can dive in here, look at my application, see how it's doing. There's my Spark app. It's still running. And yeah, I can take a look at that. I can see how many tasks are left. And if I go, or actually, let me go back real quick. On this event timeline here, this is the cool thing with that dynamic resource allocation. You can see all these executors getting dynamically added throughout the course of the job. So it went and listed files on S3, started reading those in. As it decided it needed more capacity, it added more capacity, and it'll spin those executors back down once I'm done. I've been talking for quite a while, so I want to pause briefly.
No. This is quite amazing, because I think what you accomplished was just really cool. You literally went in a console. You had a few features or adjustments you had to make to the job. You launched the job, and all of a sudden, you're actually running this EMR job, and I think that's super cool. So You said it can be run from the command line. You can do it from the console, but is there also CloudFormation support for this too?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I'm glad you mentioned that. This entire demo that I have set up today, this entire environment, we have an EMR Serverless Samples repository out on GitHub. So github.com, AWS Samples, EMR Serverless Samples, and we've got CloudFormation templates in there for everything you would need. So we've got kind of like the minimum, bare minimum CloudFormation template there, where you just specify your EMR Serverless application and your configuration. And then we've also got, since I mentioned we have Airflow support too, we've got this whole MWAA template that creates everything you need in your EC2 or your AWS account for you. Creates a bucket, creates a VPC, creates the MWAA environment, and can get you up and running. So go check out those templates. There's also a bunch of PySpark examples in here as well. So in this examples folder, I've got some Java API, Python API, and PySpark examples, including that extreme weather script that I am running today.
Oh, it's super interesting. Very cool. So, with this being a kind of an all serverless solution, what about costs associated with this? I'm assuming that, because it can spin up and spin down, it's relatively cost effective.
Yeah, yeah. You get charged for the runtime of your job and the resources that it used, and that's one thing I actually didn't notice this until quite recently. But you can click on a job, and it actually will tell you the total resource utilization for that specific job, which is really neat. So you get charged, per vCPU hour and memory hour that your job is running. So, as long as your jobs are efficient, you can optimize your cost pretty well. If you do have pre-initialized capacity running, you will get charged for that capacity that's running as well. But that's kind of the nice thing about serverless Spark or EMR serverless is I can go in here and click on my application, and I could just go ahead and stop that application, and it would release all the resources, and I could leave that application there and not get charged for it, but still kind of interact with the jobs that are in there and all that kind of stuff. So
Wow, that is super exciting.
I'm pretty thrilled as somebody as somebody that has done a lot of work with Spark jobs and all that kind of stuff. This is it's so easy. The first time that I ran a Spark job through EMR Serverless when we had it in preview, I just had this huge grin on my face because I was like, this is it. This is all I have to do.
Yeah, I think this is super exciting too. I've in my previous life, I used to work for a company, and we did a lot of data manipulation. And this is something that we tried to build. We actually tried to build kind of this kind of clone of this on Lambda. So I'm glad that you guys are releasing this because there's clearly a reason to have this.
Yeah. And actually, let's do one. Do we have time to do one more quick Airflow demo?
Absolutely. I'd love to hear
Sweet.
more about Airflow.
All right. So yeah, with Airflow, I've got a couple. Like I mentioned, we've got in the EMR Serverless samples, we've got an Airflow operator in there. This will be released as an official Airflow operator now that EMR Serverless is generally available. But for the time being, you can just install it from this repository. And we've got a couple sample DAGs in there too. So these are the scheduled jobs that I mentioned essentially. So one of those is just a start job run. So if you already have an application ID, you could just use this EMR Serverless start job operator to run a job. This could be pretty cool. For example, if you have some data landing in an S3 bucket and you want to trigger an EMR Serverless job, you could certainly do this, with Airflow or with Lambda triggers or something like that, where you just go ahead and kick off this job when a file lands in the bucket, and all you need is that application ID and IAM role. So pretty easy to get started. And then I have this end-to-end example too. Which you don't even need an application ID. You can, within the whole Airflow job, you can create an application, you can run multiple jobs and shut the application down. So, there's no resources at all for you to kind of worry about, which is pretty exciting. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like in Airflow. So I've already got this EMR Serverless demo in my Airflow environment on Airflow 2.2.2. And if I open that UI, in here we can see my two jobs. I mentioned I have, just that single job and then my end-to-end one. So I'm actually going to go ahead and trigger this end-to-end one right now. And that just kicked off. And if I look at the DAG, you can see this, lovely diagram of how the job is going to run. Most Airflow DAGs are a little bit more complicated than this, but this is just, a simple example here. And I can click on that and look at the logs for that. So we can see that this actually already went ahead, created the application, started it for me. And then what's going to happen next is the two jobs here are going to run, and then it'll shut down. And again, I can go back to Studio here, and we can see there's my Airflow test application that just got created. And you can even see I've got a different release version there too. So this is an older release version of EMR that we were using during the preview. So you can run different versions of Spark if you want to, or different versions of Hive on EMR Serverless, which is pretty sweet. Really nice for testing upgrades and whatnot too. But yeah, I can go into my Airflow test app here. You can see I've got two jobs that are scheduled. And again, since this application just started, it takes a bit for that the resources to get there, but those jobs will run, that application will spin back down, and again, you can go on with your happy life. One other thing that I showed here too, my extreme weather job finished. Let me go back to that super quick. One other nice thing I want to call out in Studio is we have this clone job button. So if you are trying jobs over and over again, you hit clone job, we populate all that stuff for you, and you just hit go. So this is really nice. If you already configured a job, you just want to run it again, and you can see that job is scheduled, and it's going to start running pretty soon there. So that's pretty awesome to have there too, because you can just clone those jobs over and over again. And then, like I mentioned, here's my job that finished, and I can even go in here. I can download my driver logs, save them locally. So it makes it a lot easier to do all the things that you need to do without having to leave your browser, or if you want to, you can do that as well. So it gives you a lot of flexibility there. But there's my standard out. I could open that up and look at it and see the output of the job, and it would show me that I think somewhere in Chad this year had the highest sustained temperature for one day. So pretty fun little script. It gives you like some different locations and what extreme weather they've had. Like I think Mount Washington, New Hampshire had the strongest wind gust at 99 miles an hour or something like that. So
I don't know. I would argue about the hottest places. I mean, I live in Georgia and it's hot all the time.
pretty much.
So I think we've got some interesting questions from our audience. I guess we'll take a few minutes and answer, and we can talk about those. So I think you touched on this one a little bit. I think this one's describing like if you add a file to S3, it can trigger a lambda function and then kick off the EMR serverless. That's possible, right? Because we just kind of touched on that a little bit. Right?
Yep. Yeah, totally
Right.
possible, either with Airflow or without. So if you check out the serverless samples, I've got a serverless Python API. So you could have a Python Lambda, and that Lambda, you could have that triggered by a file dropping on S3. And I've got some example code here where you could even create an application and run a job on that application to do whatever you want. So yeah, totally possible to kind of like take a Lambda, call EMR serverless from there, depending on which language you're working on in your Lambda. But yeah, totally possible.
All right. So, and we have some other questions from the audience. So, let's see. So, we'll go to our next one. Let's take a look. All right. So, is EMR serverless a target for step functions tasks or event bridge?
I will say not yet, but that's certainly something that we want to do. With EMR, for example, that is a target for step functions, and I believe EMR and EKS is as well. So this is certainly something that we want to add to serverless as well.
Super cool. Super cool. So, thank you for being on the show. And I think it's our audience really wants to be able to get our hands on this demo that you showed, the GitHub repository. And are there any blogs or anything else that customers can look at?
Yeah. Just the other day, we've got our GA blog. So we just announced you can use EMR Serverless, and it's generally available now. That's on the AWS Big Data blog. So there's that. There's the EMR Serverless Samples repository that I mentioned. That is a great resource to go and take a look and see example jobs and CloudFormation templates and all that kind of stuff. And then we have put a lot of work into our EMR Serverless user guide, and I'll drop that in the chat later too. But if you just Google EMR Serverless user guide, you will see our user guide there, and we have a lot of walkthroughs in there as well, a lot of how-to guides, how to use Hoodie, Apache Hoodie and Apache Iceberg with EMR Serverless, how to use Python libraries, how to use Delta Lake. So we've put a lot of effort into trying to make that user guide as useful as possible. So take a look at it. Let us know also how it goes. At the bottom of the docs, there's that provide feedback link. I actually read those. So click on that. Let us know how we can make it better. We really appreciate that. And we're trying to make those user guides as awesome as possible.
Well, this is great. I mean, the people would get to know if they leave the feedback there, you're gonna read it, and probably another user guide coming up.
Yep, exactly.
All right. Well, Damon, I want to thank you for being on our show and showing us this very cool release from EMR. I know I'm super excited about using it. I think Seema's excited about using it. I think everyone's excited about using it.
I hope so. I'm excited. I'm just going to keep running this like extreme weather job over and over again. But
Yeah.
thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. And I hope folks try it and shout out and let me know how it goes.
All right. And you definitely let me know if Georgia comes to the top of the list of being the hottest.
I will. I think it did for 2021.
All right. Well, thank you again.
All right. Later.